Now, for the most part, the different types can't really play with each other. But there are exceptions to the rule. What I mean by that is, like, if I try to do 1 plus 1, that's going to give me 2. And it would be really annoying if I couldn't type this out. 1 plus 1.5, right? Technically, this is an integer, and this is a floating point number, and I would really like 2.5. I don't want to have to do anything fancy there, and you shouldn't, because that's common enough. If you ever do, so anytime you deal with with an integer and a float, or a bunch of integers and a single float, whenever there's a floating number involved, it's going to get converted to a float. Well, when we're dealing with just numbers, so like 1 plus 2 plus 5 times 3.5. Right? That will give us 20.5. So that's going to give us float. And remember, also when we deal with division, that's just going to give us a float as well. So those are pretty common. But what about doing something like, can you do something like this? 1 plus 2. Or to be more clear, 1 plus 20 as opposed to 20. Right? And you'll see that you get an error. And you get this for a lot of things if there are different types and you try to do operations with them. It'll say unsupported operand type. Right? Unsupported operand types for plus. Plus being the operator, operands being the things on the left and the right of an operator. What are the operands that are unsupported? Well, you can't mix your int and string. And that makes sense. In other programming languages, you might end up with the string 120, but it's okay for Python to say, no, you can't add things like that. And I don't think subtraction would work in any kind of language. So if I said 20, minus 1, right, can't subtract a string from an int from a string. But if, on the other hand, there is one kind of operation that does work. We didn't get into what if we do with strings like this. 10 plus 20, or 10 plus 20. If you add strings together, right? So we can't add a number in a string. We can't really mix and match with strings, right? Numbers and one is text, one is math, right? So they don't really mix. But what if I do text plus text? It will just simply do concatenation, which is a really fancy word for saying it glues them together, right? So produce 10 plus 20, that gives us a new string, new piece of text, 1020, right? Makes sense that we can't really subtract these guys. 10 minus 20, because it's not 10 minus 20. He says you can't subtract strings. What would that even do? And you can't multiply strings together, or can you? 10 times 20. God knows what division. Although you get a different error here. Can't multiply sequence by a non-int of type string. Python's really awesome because there is one thing you can do that's pretty cool. Na times 5 plus Batman. Oh, and let's put in a space, because unless I have a space, it's not going to put a space in between what's on one side of the plus and one side is the other. So, no, Batman. So, you've got yourself a... So when I multiply a string by a number, or rather any sequence, what the heck's a sequence? Well, string is obviously a type of sequence, but those are things like lists that we'll learn later on. Anytime you multiply some sequence by a number, it's just going to repeat it. So here, if I multiply text by a number, it's just going to repeat that. And that's unique to Python. Well, there's probably other languages that have it, so I guess not technically unique. But it's a thing that a lot of other programming languages don't have, like Java. I really wish Java had that. So for instance, if I just want to repeat something, repeat times 4, this will give me 4 repeats glued together. If I wanted actually a space between my repeats, with strings you got to be explicit about where you want your space. So times 4 over here, right? Or where you want your space inside the string, and there. And notice, by the way, that it's got a blank space right over here. So you can multiply. That's the only kind of mixing you can do with strings and numbers. So, but what if you really want them to go together, right? What if you've got some data over here and you want to say, like, the current temperature is, and then you've got a piece of data over here, like a variable, which is our next video. Like, the current temperature is that. Well, what you can, so say it was 91. But what you can do is that you can make use of our type conversion functions, which are pretty easy to remember. So str is a function. You throw anything into str and it's going to turn it into a string, right? String 1.0. That becomes the string 1.0. str hello. Well, it turns your string hello into a string hello. Not really too exciting there. But you can also turn your integers with int. So say our 10, that'll convert it in from the text 10 to the number 10. And if we do the same to with float, that'll convert it into 10.0, right? We'll add the floating point into there. You can also turn any, it's not really too necessary, but you can easily turn any integer into a float. And you can also turn any floating point number, 0.14159, into an int with the int command. So all those basic types, float, int, string, they have functions that turn one to another, which is kind of useful, especially when we're just going to be adding when we're going to be messing with variables, which is our next video.